Set this place ablaze!
There are places in this world that do not belong to daylight. Places that exist in the hours between midnight and the first grey suggestion of morning, when the moon holds absolute authority over everything beneath it, and the things that move through the dark do so with a confidence that daylight creatures will never fully understand. Places where the boundary between the natural world and the world that runs beneath it, older and wilder and governed by entirely different laws, becomes thin enough to feel with your hands. This is one of those places. They called it the Moon Garden. And in a territory governed by wolves, in a pack whose bloodline ran back 17 generations to the first great Alpha, who had drawn the boundary lines with his own claws in the bark of the oldest trees at the four corners of Ashveil land, the word moon was not decorative. It was not poetic shorthand for something beautiful and silver and remote. In Ashveil territory, the moon was the source. The anchor. The thing that all of them, in the deepest and most animal part of themselves, answered to without question, the way the tide answers the pool it cannot name, but has never once refused. The Moon Garden understood this. That is the only way to say it accurately. The garden understood what it was rooted in, what kind of earth held it, what kind of blood had been worked into the soil over 11 years of tending by hands that were, beneath the skin, something more and older and far more complicated than simply human. She was not a full wolf. That matters to the telling of this. Her mother had been pack-born, Ashveil blood on one side going back 4 generations, but her father had been something else, something that the pack elders spoke about in the careful, measured tones reserved for things they respected, but did not entirely trust. A line that carried moon sense in it. The ability to read the lunar cycles not as an external phenomenon, but as an internal one, the way wolves read the shift of wind. To know, in the body, what the moon was doing and what it required. She had inherited this from him along with his silence, his self-containment, and his absolute refusal to use what he carried for anything other than healing. Her name was Maren. She had been born inside Ashveil territory. She had grown up on its edges, neither fully pack nor fully other, belonging to both categories in ways that made her belong completely to neither. The wolves respected what she could do. They did not fully know what she was. She had kept it that way deliberately, not out of shame, but out of the understanding that there are some things that, once known, cannot be unknown, and that the not knowing was protecting more people than just herself. She had left Ashveil territory at 19. Returned at 23. Left again. Returned finally and permanently at 28, after the thing that happened, after the loss that sent her away from the world of people and into the world of growing things, after the grief that became the Moon Garden, the way grief, when it has nowhere left to go, sometimes becomes something extraordinary. She had been 39 on the night this story begins. 11 years in that garden. 11 years of the most sustained and dedicated work she had ever done. 11 years of putting everything she was and everything she carried and everything she knew into a piece of ground that nobody else had wanted, that sat at the very edge of Ashveil territory like an afterthought, like a thing the land itself had set aside for someone who would eventually understand what to do with it. She had understood. The garden she built was not merely a collection of rare plants, though it was certainly that. The silver-stemmed herbs that grew in its northern quadrant were found nowhere else in 400 miles of documented territory. The moonflowers that she had cultivated from seeds she had obtained through a series of careful, quiet negotiations that had taken 2 years to complete bloomed in a way that no botanist who studied them could fully account for, opening not merely in response to darkness and lunar light, but in response to something else, something they seemed to read from the soil itself, from the intentions of the person tending them. 3 different healers from neighboring packs had made the journey to see those flowers and had left saying the same thing, that they had never encountered anything like them, that they seemed to operate at the intersection of the natural and something that the natural world had not yet developed sufficient language to describe. She accepted these assessments without comment. The medicinal properties of what she grew were not theoretical. They were documented, in the careful records she kept in a journal that nobody else had ever read, in case after case of healing that would have been impossible with ordinary remedies. Infections that had resisted every known treatment, had cleared within days of a specific preparation she made from the silver herbs. A wolf who had been expected to lose the use of his left arm after a territorial dispute had recovered full function over 3 months of treatment with compounds she prepared at specific lunar phases. A child born with a weakness in the blood that the pack healers said would likely claim her before her 5th birthday had reached her 13th in full health, strong enough to have already shown her first shift. Maren did not speak about these cases. She did not catalogue her successes or build a reputation on them. She healed who came to her and she asked for nothing and she returned to the garden and she was, by every external measure, simply a woman who lived at the edge of things and kept to herself and grew plants that nobody else could grow. That was the surface. Below the surface was everything else. Below the surface was the moon sense that woke her at specific hours of the night with knowledge she had not sought, the awareness of the lunar calendar running through her like a second circulatory system, the ability to feel the shift between phases in her joints before any visible change in the sky confirmed it. Below the surface was the understanding she had carried since childhood that her particular combination of bloodlines had given her access to a kind of healing that went deeper than herbs and compounds, that was rooted in something older than any pack tradition she had ever encountered, something that the women on her father's side had called moon working and had passed down in whispered instruction across generations, always to exactly one daughter, always at the specific age when the ability matured, always with the same warning. She had heard this warning at 16 from her grandmother, the last of the line before her, and she had thought she understood it. She had not understood it until 7 months before this story begins, on a night at the borderlands, when she had looked down at a small boy lying in the grass with the particular stillness of something that is leaving the world, and she had understood in the space of a single breath exactly what acting would cost her and exactly what not acting would mean, and she had acted without hesitation, and she had paid the price in silence every day since. If this story is already sitting in you in a way that feels like recognition, if you feel the weight of what is being built here, stay with us. Subscribe. Because what comes next is the part that changes everything, and you need to be here for it from the beginning. The Ashveil Pack was one of the oldest in the region. 17 generations of alpha succession, an unbroken line, that was the source of considerable pride and the basis of the pack's considerable reputation among the other territories that surrounded it. The Ashveil wolves were not the largest pack in the region. They were not the most numerous. What they were was stable. What they were was continuous. In a world where pack succession frequently produced violence, fracture, the kind of internal rupture that sent wolves scattering across territory lines to seek absorption into neighboring packs, Ashveil had not broken in 17 generations. The bloodline had held. This continuity was not accidental. It was the product of a specific quality that had appeared in the Ashveil alpha line in the 5th generation, and had been present in every alpha since, a quality the pack elders called the steadying, though it had no single name in any language, and resisted precise description. It was something in the nature of the Ashveil alphas that made the pack cohere around them the way iron filings cohere around a magnet, not through force, but through something more fundamental, more physical, something that operated below the level of choice. Caelan was the 17th alpha of the Ashveil line. He had come to the position at 29, following his father's death in a territorial conflict with the Grey Hollow Pack to the north, a conflict that had been resolved, by Caelan, within 8 months of his succession through a combination of force, negotiation, and the particular quality of presence that made other alphas, even those with larger packs and greater numbers, eventually recalibrate their assessment of what they were dealing with. He had been alpha for 12 years by the time this story begins. He was 41 years old. He had the specific tiredness of a person who has been responsible for the safety of many other people for a long time, and has never once considered setting that responsibility down, not because he lacked the imagination to conceive of a different life, but because the responsibility was so completely integrated into his sense of himself that removing it would have been like removing something structural. He had a mate once. Ren's mother. Her name was Sable, and she had been extraordinary in ways that Caelan still could not think about directly, even 3 years after her death, only sidelong, in the peripheral vision of his memory. She had died of something that the pack healers had no name for, a wasting that had taken her in 6 months from full strength to gone, that had resisted every treatment, that had been, in the quiet assessment of everyone who had watched it happen, simply unstoppable. Caelan had stood at the border of every territory, within reach, and demanded healers, and received them, and watched each one arrive with hope and leave with lowered eyes. And Sable had died anyway, in the spring, when Ren was 4 years old, on a morning when the light coming through the windows was almost insultingly beautiful. He had raised Ren alone. With the pack around him, because a pack is never truly alone in anything, but without a partner, without the specific companionship of someone who shared the weight of knowing this child completely. He had done it the way he did everything, with full commitment, and without complaint, and with the particular fierceness of a person who has already lost one irreplaceable thing, and has decided, at some foundational level, that they will not lose another. Ren was 7 years old on the night this story begins. Small for his age, quick-minded, already showing the first signs of the steadying quality that marked the Ashveil Alpha line, that quality of making the room cohere around him that had nothing to do with his age or his size and everything to do with what he carried in his blood. He was, by every measure, the continuation of 17 generations of an unbroken line. He was also, more simply and more importantly, Caelan's child. The person Caelan loved most in the world. The center of whatever world Caelan had left after Sable's death had taken so much of the rest of it. Ren had been sick for 17 days when Caelan came to the moon garden. The sickness had begun with something that looked like an ordinary fever, the kind that moved through the pack's children periodically, and resolved within a week with standard treatment and rest. The pack healer, a capable woman named Drava, who had been treating Ashveil wolves for 20 years, had not been initially alarmed. She had given Ren the standard remedies and told Caelan to keep him warm and quiet, and expected to see improvement within 3 days. There was no improvement. By day 5, Ren's temperature had climbed beyond the range of ordinary fever into something that Drava had no framework for. By day 8, he was showing signs in his blood that she could observe, but not identify, a change in the quality of it that she described, in her careful healer's language, as a dimming. As though something that should have been bright in him was losing light. By day 12, he had stopped eating. By day 15, he had stopped speaking, not from weakness of voice, but from some internal withdrawal, as though his attention was required elsewhere, and the effort of maintaining contact with the external world had become more than he could afford. By day 17, Drava had called in every resource she had. 4 healers from neighboring packs had arrived and examined Ren, and departed with the same lowered eyes that Caelan had last seen 3 years ago, the specific expression of healers confronting something they cannot fix. 2 of them had suggested remedies that Drava had tried. 1 of them had suggested something that Caelan did not ask about the ethics of, only the efficacy, and had been told quietly that it would not work, and might accelerate what was already happening. Caelan had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 17 days. He had sat beside Ren's bed in the hours when the pack was asleep, and he had talked to his son, telling him things, memories, stories, the history of the Ashveil line that Ren would one day carry, the names of his ancestors, the landmarks of the territory, as though keeping the thread of the future visible might give Ren something to hold onto in whatever distance he was drifting toward. He had said Sable's name to his son for the first time since her death, telling Ren about his mother, who she had been, how she had laughed, what she had seen in Caelan that Caelan had never entirely believed she was right about, all the things he had been saving for when Ren was older, releasing them now into the dark of a sick room, because older was beginning to feel like a direction his son might not be able to reach. On the 17th day, someone came to Caelan with a name. A theory. A story. The someone was a wolf named Ferris. He held a mid-rank position in the pack, had held it for 6 years, was competent in the specific and limited way of a person who does not excel, but does not fail. He had, Caelan would later learn, his own reasons for what he did on that night. A history with Maren that she had never spoken about because it was not her way to speak about people who had wronged her. A long resentment that had been quietly fed by exactly the kind of powerlessness that produces dangerous decisions in people who cannot otherwise act on what they feel. What Ferris told Caelan was carefully assembled from pieces of truth arranged in a configuration that produced a false picture. Yes, Maren had been in the borderlands 7 months ago. Yes, she had been seen with the rare silver herbs from her garden. Yes, Ren's symptoms matched a rare moon-working affliction that he said, read about in an old pack record, one that required specific rare herbs to produce. He did not say that she had used those herbs to save a child's life. He said, instead, in the quiet and urgent tones of a man who wants to appear reluctant to speak, but has in fact been waiting a very long time for precisely this audience, that he thought Caelan should know. That he would never normally bring something like this without more certainty. That he was only saying it because Ren's condition matched so precisely. That he would, of course, understand if Caelan dismissed it. He had calculated correctly that Caelan would not dismiss it. He had also calculated correctly that a father who has been watching his child dim for 17 days without being able to stop it, who has exhausted every legitimate avenue, who is running on grief and sleeplessness, and the specific terror of a person who has already lost one person they could not save, is not in a condition to apply his normal standard of evidence to information that offers, finally, a direction. Any direction. Even a wrong one. Caelan had gone to the moon garden within the hour. The pack had felt him moving through the territory the way packs feel their alphas, not through visible tracking, but through that deeper animal sense of the alpha's location, an emotional state that every pack member carries somewhere below conscious awareness. Those who were awake felt something in Caelan's movement that concerned them. It had a quality they recognized from the worst moments of the Grey Hollow conflict, a quality of momentum that had passed through deliberation and come out the other side of it into something simpler and more absolute. 3 of the elder pack members had followed at a distance. Not to intervene. They were not certain yet that intervention was needed. But they felt that the moment should be witnessed by someone whose testimony would be reliable, and they were, without coordinating it explicitly, doing exactly that. They arrived at the edge of the clearing that contained the moon garden in time to see Caelan at the gate. Maren was inside, working by moonlight, as she often did in the hours after the pack was mostly settled. She looked up when the gate opened. Her hand stilled on the plant she was tending, a silver-stemmed herb in its 3rd year of growth, one of the most potent specimens in the garden, and she looked at Caelan with the steady, unfrightened attention of someone who has built themselves, over 11 years, into a person who does not flinch at what approaches them. She knew, the moment she saw his face, that something had been said. She did not know what specifically. She did not need to. She could read grief and rage and the particular combination of the two that produces the most dangerous decisions as clearly as she could read the lunar calendar. She had been reading it in various forms all her life. He told her what he had heard. His voice was controlled. That was the most frightening thing about it. A man screaming in grief is a man who still has some distance between himself and action. A man speaking in that low, controlled register had already crossed the distance. She listened. He asked her if she had been in the borderlands 7 months ago. She said yes. He asked if she had the silver herbs with her. She said yes. He asked her what she had been doing there, and why she had not reported her presence at a borderlands gathering to the pack, which was, under Ashveil protocol, expected of anyone with pack-adjacent status, who attended a multi-pack gathering. And here was the moment. Here was the specific, narrow, irreversible moment at which everything turned. Because she could have answered that question. She had an answer. The answer was complete and true and would have explained everything, would have ended this before it became what it became, would have preserved the garden, and changed the entire trajectory of the next several hours. But the answer required her to name other wolves who had been at that borderlands gathering in circumstances that could not be made public. Wolves from 3 different packs, who had been there under cover of a private negotiation, whose exposure would have destabilized 2 territorial agreements that were currently keeping the peace between packs that had historically been violent with each other. She had been there as a neutral healer, one of 2 people outside the negotiating parties who knew the gathering had occurred. The other person who knew was bound by the same silence. If she answered Caelan's question fully and honestly, she would name those wolves. She would unravel those agreements. She would potentially ignite exactly the kind of inter-pack violence that the secret negotiation had been designed to prevent. She had made a commitment to silence that she had not made lightly and had not broken in 7 months, and was not going to break now, not even for this, not even standing in the moonlight in her own garden, with Caelan looking at her with that terrifying controlled grief on his face. She said nothing. The silence lasted long enough for the elder wolves at the tree line to shift their weight uncomfortably, to exchange glances, to feel the specific dread of people watching an irreversible thing approach, and being uncertain whether they have the right to step in front of it. They did not step forward. They would reckon with that later. For now they watched. Caelan's voice, when he spoke again, had dropped further. He told her that her silence was an answer. He told her that he had a son, who was dying, and that if she knew something about it, and was choosing not to speak, then she had made herself into something he did not have a word for that was suitable for polite conversation. He told her that he was giving her 2 hours to clear her presence from pack-adjacent territory. Then he turned to the garden. What he did to it, he did with his hands. Not fire first, not immediately. He pulled things from the ground. The silver herbs, roots and all, dragged out of 11 years of carefully prepared soil, their root systems extensive and complex, and completely destroyed by the removal. He overturned the carved marker stones. He dismantled the low stone walls that separated the garden's quadrants, walls she had built 1 stone at a time over 3 seasons. He moved through the garden with the systematic thoroughness of a man who wants to be certain, when he is finished, that nothing remains that it is not finished. And then he found the moonflowers. He stood in front of them for a moment. The witnesses at the tree line later said they had held their breath at that moment, though none of them could explain exactly why that particular pause felt significant. Perhaps because the moonflowers were impossible to mistake for anything other than what they were, extraordinary beyond any ordinary standard of beauty, full open in the moonlight, so luminously white they seemed to generate their own light, so clearly the result of years of specific and devoted cultivation that even a person in the state Caelan was in should have been able to feel the weight of what they were looking at. He burned them. He carried a flame lighter that he used in the field during territorial patrols. He used it now. The moonflowers caught immediately, their petals far more combustible than they appeared, and the fire moved through them quickly, and the smell that rose from the burning was extraordinary and terrible, something between incense and loss, a smell that the elder witnesses said they would carry in their olfactory memory for the rest of their lives. Maren stood at the gate. She had moved there when he began pulling things from the ground. She had not fled. She had not attacked, which several witnesses admitted they had half expected and would have understood. She had walked to the gate of her own garden, and she had stood there and she had watched. Her face, in the firelight of her burning moonflowers, was the thing that stayed with the witnesses most completely in all the years afterward. They struggled to describe it accurately. It was not the face of someone who feels nothing. The grief on it was enormous, total, the kind of grief that occupies every available feature. But beneath the grief, holding it, was something else. Something that one of the elders, a wolf named Hesker, who had been in the Ashveil Pack for 50 years and had seen most things, described afterward as the expression of someone who is paying a price they agreed to pay. Not happily. Not without pain. but with the particular steadiness of a person who made their choice at an earlier moment and is now simply living in the consequence of it, and who is not going to let the consequence change what they chose. She was protecting the secret. Even now. Even in this. When the last of the moonflowers had burned and the garden was ash and overturned earth and scattered stone, Caelan came back to where she stood at the gate. He looked at her. She looked at him. Whatever he saw in her face in that moment he carried with him without speaking about it for a very long time, and when he finally did speak about it, much later, he said only that it had not looked like the face he had expected. He could not say more than that on the first telling. On the second telling, much later still, he said it had looked like the face of someone who was absorbing a blow on behalf of something he could not see, and that this had registered in him even then, even in that moment, as a detail that did not fit the story he had been told. But he was not ready to examine that yet. He was not capable of it. He left. She watched him go. Then she turned around and she walked back into the ash of her garden. The elder witnesses at the tree line were uncertain, afterward, about exactly what they saw next, because they were far enough away that their eyes may have been constructing narrative from incomplete visual information. But what they believed they saw was this. Maren moving through the ash and the overturned earth of the garden, slowly, deliberately, not randomly, with the focused attention of someone looking for something specific. Pausing here. Kneeling there. Remaining very still with her hands in the soil in several locations. And then, finally, standing and walking to the gate and leaving. She appeared, from that distance, to have found what she was looking for. They did not know yet what it was. In the main hall of the Ashveil Pack, Ren lay in the room that had been made into his sick room 6 days into his illness. Drava was with him, as she had been almost continuously for 17 days, monitoring his condition with the careful attention of a healer, who has not given up even when the giving up would be understandable. She had not given up. She was also, and she would later be honest about this, running out of things to try. Caelan returned to the hall. He entered Ren's room, and he stood over his son, and he looked at him for a long time. Ren was breathing. That much was still true. The breathing was too shallow, too careful, the breathing of a small body that was rationing something. But he was breathing. Caelan sat down beside him and put one hand, very carefully, over Ren's hand, and he stayed there. Drava came to find him 2 hours later. She had been in her records room. She had the look of someone who has been moving very quickly through documents for a sustained period, and has found something that both answers a question and raises another one that is considerably more urgent. She told him what she had found. She had been cross-referencing Ren's specific symptom progression against every documented case in her records and the borrowed records of the 4 visiting healers. She had found one match. A single case, documented 40 years ago in a pack record that had come to her, as part of a historical collection she had obtained from a retiring healer 3 years ago, and had not yet fully catalogued. The case described a wolf child, 6 years old, who had presented with exactly the symptoms Ren was showing, in exactly the same progression, at exactly the same rate of deterioration. The pack healer, who had documented the case, had tried 11 different treatments. None of them had worked. The child had died on the 23rd day. But the document had a second part. A notation added later, in different ink, by what appeared to be a different hand, someone who had obtained the record afterward and added information. The notation said that the condition was not untreatable. That it was, in fact, one of the oldest documented afflictions in wolf medicine, a moon sickness, the records called it, a disruption in the lunar alignment of the blood that occurred occasionally in wolf children who carried particularly strong alpha bloodline and whose systems were, in a sense, running at a frequency higher than their developing bodies could yet fully sustain. The treatment required a specific preparation. A compound of 3 herbs, one of which was a silver-stemmed variety that grew in controlled lunar cultivation conditions, and was found in very few locations. One of which was a moonflower extract that required the flower to have been grown through at least 4 complete lunar cycles to reach sufficient potency. And one of which was a root compound that needed to be prepared during a specific lunar phase, which phase was, Drava calculated, as she told him this, 3 days away. The herbs were extremely rare. The moonflower in particular. She had not encountered a cultivated specimen in 20 years of practice. She knew of only one person in 400 miles of territory who had been cultivating them. She did not say the name immediately. She watched him put it together. When she saw it land in him, she said it anyway. Because she needed him to hear it spoken. Maren. The silence that followed was the longest silence Caelan had produced in 12 years of leadership, and he was a man who used silence strategically. This silence was not strategic. This silence was the sound of a man discovering that he has made a mistake of a magnitude he does not yet have the full measure of. Drava was not finished. She told him the second thing. She had gone, after finding the record, to speak with Heska, the senior elder who had been in the pack for 50 years and remembered everything. She had asked Heska whether she knew anything about Maren's presence at the borderlands 7 months ago, because the borderlands gathering would have been attended by healers from multiple packs, and she was trying to understand the timeline of the moon sickness's onset in relation to that event. Heska had told her something that she had been holding for 7 months. Heska had been at the borderlands gathering. Not as a participant in the primary meeting, but in an adjacent capacity that she was willing to discuss in general terms without naming specifics. She had seen Maren there. She had watched Maren working through the herb supplies she carried. She had watched Maren leave the main gathering area and move to a quieter edge of the borderlands territory. She had followed, at a discreet distance, out of the particular attentiveness of a 50-year pack elder who notices things and keeps them filed. What she had seen at that quiet edge of the borderlands was this. A child lying in the grass. Unconscious. Small. A wolf child, clearly, with the specific pallor of moon sickness, which Heska had seen once before in her 50 years and recognized immediately. Maren kneeling beside him. Maren's hands moving with the focused intensity of a healer who understands the urgency of the moment precisely and is operating at the outer edge of what she has available to work with. 3 hours of work. Heska had stayed for all of it, hidden in the tree line, watching. At no point had Maren stopped. At no point had she hesitated or looked uncertain about what she was doing. She had used her silver herbs. She had used her moonflower extract. She had used a preparation that Heska did not recognize and could not identify by sight or smell, something that clearly cost Maren something to use, because she had paused before administering it with the expression of a person making an irreversible decision, and then she had administered it. The child had stabilized. Over the 3 hours, his color had returned. His breathing had changed from the shallow rationing Heska recognized as moon sickness into the deeper rhythm of sleep. By the time Maren sat back from him and looked at what she had done, the child was sleeping rather than dying, and the difference was visible from the tree line. Maren had waited until she was certain he was stable. Then she had stood. She had looked around the clearing. She had taken her supplies, which were considerably depleted from what they had been at the start, and she had walked away. She had not waited for the child to wake. She had not left her name. She had simply done what she had come there to do and left. Heska had stayed until other adults from the gathering came to find the child and carry him back to the main area. She had heard the relief in their voices. She had heard them say his name, and she had added it to the file of things she kept in the part of her memory reserved for things that might one day matter. His name was Ren. She had learned later, when she returned to Ashveil territory, that Ren was the Alpha's son. She had held this information for 7 months, waiting for a moment when saying it seemed necessary. She had not said it before because Ren had seemed healthy after his return from the Borderlands gathering, which Caelan had attended with him, and which had not been connected in anyone's awareness to anything unusual. She had assumed, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, that the matter was resolved and that Maren's intervention had been fully effective, and that the secret was best kept in the service of whatever it was protecting. She had not anticipated what Ren's illness 7 months later would reveal about the nature of moon sickness, which was, as Drava's research had now confirmed, a condition that could be stabilized in the short term by the treatment Maren had administered, but required a second, more complete treatment to be fully resolved. A treatment that could only be given after the initial stabilization had allowed the child's system to reset, which took approximately 6 to 7 months. Maren had known this. This was the piece that Caelan sat with the longest when Drava finished speaking. Maren had known, when she treated Ren at the Borderlands, that the treatment she could provide that night was not complete. She had known that he would need a second treatment in roughly 6 months. She had known that she would need to be in possession of a fully potent batch of silver herbs and moonflower extract when that time came, which meant protecting and cultivating her garden with that specific deadline in mind. She had known, for 7 months, that Ren's survival was on a timeline that ran directly through the moon garden. She had said nothing. She had simply tended the garden with a precision and dedication that, in retrospect, the pack members who occasionally observed her from the tree line recognized as having intensified over the past several months. More time spent. More care taken. A particular attentiveness to the silver herbs and the moonflowers that they had attributed to the natural variation of a dedicated gardener's focus across seasons. It had not been natural variation. It had been a woman quietly, consistently, without any acknowledgement, or assistance or protection, keeping a child alive through the sustained daily act of growing the things that would complete his healing. And 7 months into this, a wolf with a grudge had whispered a story into the ear of a grieving father, and the grieving father had gone to the garden, and the garden was ash. Caelan left the main hall moving faster than his pack had seen him move since the Grey Hollow conflict. He went to the moon garden first because it was the closest point, because some part of him that was still operating on instinct rather than thought went to the last known location. The gate was open. The garden was dark and ruined and smelled of burned things and overturned earth. She was not there. Heska, who had followed at a discreet distance because she had 50 years of experience in following important moments to their conclusions, told him quietly that she had seen Maren move toward the territory's eastern boundary, following the creek path. He went east. He found her at the oldest part of the creek, where the water ran clearest and the bank was wide enough to sit on without being in the water. She was sitting with her hands in the water, her back to the direction he had come from. She had her coat on. She had nothing else with her that was visible. He stopped a distance behind her. Not the distance of confrontation. Something less certain than that. She had heard him, of course. Wolf hearing, even in someone who was not fully wolf, carried further than most people accounted for. She knew his footsteps, his cadence, his particular weight distribution, the same way she knew the particular growth rate of each plant in her garden. She had been aware of him from the moment he entered the eastern path. She did not turn around. He said her name. His voice carried what it carried, and he did not attempt to control it into something more manageable. She had already seen what he looked like when he managed himself into something more manageable, and it had burned her garden down. Whatever his voice was doing now was at least honest. She turned around. She looked at him across the dark and the distance, and she did not say anything, because she was not yet certain what there was to say, and she had spent 11 years choosing silence over words that were insufficient, and this moment did not yet have words that were sufficient for it. He told her that he knew about Ren. About the Borderlands. About what she had done, and what she had known, and what she had been doing for 7 months in the garden, while saying nothing to anyone. He asked her why she had said nothing. He asked it the way a man asks a question, when he is genuinely uncertain of the answer, when he has lost confidence in his own ability to read what is in front of him, when the evidence has just rearranged itself so completely that he is not sure he can trust any of his previous interpretations. She looked at him for a long time. Then she told him. All of it. She told him about the Borderlands gathering, and about the wolves who had been present, and about the peace negotiations that their presence had been part of, and about the commitment to silence that she had made and kept. She told him about the moon working she had done for Ren that night, about what it had cost her, which was something she did not describe in detail, and he did not press her on, understanding enough to know that moon working at the level she was describing was not without consequence to the person doing it. She told him about the 7 months of tending the garden, with his son's second treatment, as the fixed point around which every decision had been oriented. She told him that she had not told him, because telling him would have required breaking the commitment she had made, and she had not been willing to break it. He asked her why she had not at least found a way to signal him. Some indirect way. Some way that protected the secret, but gave him enough to work from. She said that she had considered it many times, and that every path she found toward it required revealing enough that the rest would have been reconstructible, and that she had not been able to find one that fully protected what she had committed to protect. He asked her if she had known, when she stayed silent in the garden while he was accusing her, that Ren's condition was going to continue to worsen. She said yes. He asked how she had intended to introduce the treatment at the right moment without explaining how she knew what was needed. She told him she had been working on that. She told him she had planned to present herself to Drava in approximately 2 weeks, at the correct lunar phase, with the prepared compound, and to say that she had encountered reference to this condition in her records and believed it might be relevant to Ren's case. She had planned to let Drava make the connection herself rather than presenting it as something she had known for 7 months. He was quiet for a long time after this. He asked her whether that plan would have required her to still be in possession of the garden. She said yes. He absorbed this. He asked her one more question. He asked her why she had saved Ren in the first place. At the Borderlands, knowing what the cost of the moon working would be to herself, knowing that she was committing to a 7-month obligation she could not explain, knowing that a child with no connection to her was not her responsibility, and that no one would have known or faulted her for walking past. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite disbelief and not quite patience, but something in the territory between them, the expression of a person who does not entirely understand why the question needs asking. She told him that she had looked at a child who was dying and she had been able to do something about it. She said that was the whole of it. She said she did not require a more complex reason than that, and she had not gone looking for one. He sat down. Not near her immediately. On the bank of the creek, in the dark, a few feet away, in the dirt, without ceremony or dignity, because he was a man who had just been shown the complete picture of what he had done, and he was not yet capable of standing up straight in the knowledge of it. He put his hands on his knees and he looked at the water, and he said nothing for a long time. She watched him. She had not offered absolution. She did not have it available to offer yet. What had been burned was not abstract. It was the most specific thing in her world, the thing she had built year by year out of grief and intention, and the daily decision to stay present in a life that had given her considerable reason to withdraw from it. And it was Ash. That was real, and it was going to remain real regardless of what happened next, regardless of the completeness of his understanding, regardless of how entirely and irreversibly wrong he had been. But she was still here. She had not crossed the territory boundary. She had gone to the creek, which was still inside Ashveil land, and she had put her hands in the water, and she had sat with what had happened, and she was still sitting here, and when he had come she had turned around. That meant something. She was not yet certain exactly what it meant. But it was not nothing. He asked about the seeds. He did not ask it directly. He asked whether the garden could be rebuilt. Whether anything had survived that could be used to begin again. She opened her hand. She had been holding them in her closed fist since she sat down. 31 seeds. She had counted them twice on the walk to the creek. 31 seeds pulled from the ash and the overturned earth while everyone was watching him leave, and she had one unobserved minute in the ruins of what he had destroyed. Silver herb seeds. Moonflower seeds. The seeds of the root compound plant that only she had known how to cultivate in this territory. 31 small, unremarkable, silvery things that contained, in potential, everything that had just been burned. He looked at them. He looked at her. She told him what she had told the elders. 3 years, minimum, for the silver herbs to reach treatment potency. 6 years for the moonflowers to reach full potency from seed. There were secondary sources for some of what Ren needed immediately, other herbs that could slow the progression while the primary garden was rebuilt, and she was prepared to provide those to Drava with full instructions, immediately, tonight, without conditions. He asked what she needed. She said she needed soil and time and to be left alone to work. He told her she could have all of that. He told her she could have land anywhere in Ashveil territory, not at the edge of it, not in the section that no one had wanted. Anywhere she chose. With resources. With whatever she required. Then he told her something else. He told her that what had been done to her garden had been done on the basis of a story deliberately told to cause harm, and that the person who had told that story would be answerable to the pack for it, and that this accountability would be public and complete. She said that it was not necessary to do it on her behalf. He said he was not doing it on her behalf. He was doing it because a member of his pack had used a father's grief as a weapon against an innocent person, and against the son whose life that person had saved. And that was something that could not stand inside Ashveil territory regardless of who had been harmed by it. She looked at him carefully. She was trying to determine whether this was the statement of an alpha managing a problem, or the statement of a person who understood what had happened at its full depth. After a moment she concluded that it was both, and that the two were not mutually exclusive, and that this was, perhaps, as close to the truth of him as she was going to get on the first night. She told him she would stay. She did not say she forgave him. She did not say things were resolved between them. She said she would stay, which meant she would rebuild the garden inside Ashveil territory with the resources he was offering, and that she would treat Ren, and that beyond those two things she was not making any further commitments at this particular moment. He said that was enough. He meant it as a statement about the immediate situation. She understood it as something slightly larger than that, or perhaps she only understood it that way later, looking back. At the time she simply held the seeds more carefully in her closed hand and told him that they should go back, because Drava needed the information about the secondary herbs immediately, and Ren did not have time to waste. He stood. He offered her his hand to help her up from the bank. She looked at the hand. Then she took it and stood. They walked back to the main hall in the dark, not together exactly, not with the ease of people who had resolved something, but alongside each other, which was a different thing. A beginning rather than a conclusion, the specific and fragile state of two people who have been honest with each other in the dark and are now seeing what that honesty looks like in motion. Drava was waiting. She received the information about the secondary herbs with the focus of a healer who has been given something to work with after a prolonged period of having nothing. She asked Maren 7 precise and intelligent questions. Maren answered all of them with complete accuracy and no hesitation. They worked together in Drava's preparation room for 3 hours, Maren directing and Drava preparing, the two of them building the first stage of Ren's treatment from what was available that night, setting up a schedule for the secondary herbs that would hold his condition stable, planning the lunar phase preparation that would be needed in 3 days for the next compound. Caelan sat outside his son's room and listened to the sounds of preparation, and did not sleep, but did not pace, which was a form of stillness he had not managed in 17 days. At some point in the early hours of the morning, Ren woke. He asked for water. He asked for his father. He asked what was happening, in the matter-of-fact tones of a child who has been ill and is now, at least partially, returning to himself. Caelan went into the room and sat beside his son and held the cup of water while Ren drank, and said only that things were going to be better now. That there was someone helping. That he should rest. Ren asked who. Caelan told him there was a healer. That she was very good. That she knew exactly what was needed. Ren closed his eyes. Before he went back to sleep he said something that Caelan thought about for a long time afterward. He said in the hazy, half-present logic of a child settling back toward sleep, that he had dreamed about a garden. That it had been very white. That it had felt, he said, like being known. Caelan did not respond to that out loud. But he carried it. In the weeks that followed, the full account came to the pack the way truth usually comes in close communities, not in a single announcement, but in the slow accumulation of pieces, each piece shifting the picture slightly, each shift requiring the pack members to recalibrate their understanding of events they believed they had witnessed and now understood differently. Ferris was brought before the pack council. He did not deny what he had done, and the council found that his denial would not have been credible regardless, given the number of witnesses to various pieces of the account. His motives were examined in full. The history between him and Maren was brought into the light. A history of a years-old interaction in which he had asked something of her that she had declined, and in which his inability to accept that declination had curdled, over years of quiet feeding, into the kind of resentment that looks for exactly this kind of opportunity. The Pack Council made its decision. It was appropriate to the offense and it was, as Caelan had promised, public and complete. Maren was not present for the council proceeding. She was working. She had chosen the site for the new garden, a location that she selected herself after 3 days of walking Ashveil territory, with the particular tension of someone choosing ground for something that will need to last. She chose land near the center of Pack territory, a south-facing clearing with specific soil composition and lunar exposure that she assessed with instruments the pack had never seen before, small tools that she carried in a worn leather case and used with quiet expertise. The pack members who observed her assessment from a respectful distance understood that they were watching someone with knowledge they did not have, applied with a precision they could not fully evaluate. She chose the ground and she told Caelan what she would need. He provided it. The pack watched the alpha deliver materials to a woman who had lost her garden because of a failure of his judgment, and they watched him do it without ceremony, without making it into a public display of accountability, without performing the making good in a way that suggested it was primarily about his own reputation. He brought what she needed and he set it down and he asked if there was anything else. She told him what else there was and he obtained it. This happened multiple times over the first 2 weeks. It became, in the quiet way of things that are repeated, a pattern. A rhythm. A thing the pack observed and discussed and gradually incorporated into their understanding of who both of these people were. Drava and Maren had established a working relationship that the pack healer described, when asked, as unlike anything in her 20 years of practice. Maren's knowledge was not supplementary to Drava's. It operated in a different register, at a different level of the problem, and the two of them together were able to address things that neither of them could have addressed alone. Drava was honest about this, which was the particular honesty of a skilled person, who is secure enough in themselves to acknowledge, when they are in the presence of someone whose capabilities exceed their own in specific areas without feeling diminished by it. Ren improved. Not dramatically. Not overnight. Moon sickness does not resolve overnight even with correct treatment, and Maren had been clear with Drava and through Drava with Caelan about the realistic timeline and the stages they could expect. But the dimming that Drava had described stopped. The light that had been leaving Ren's system stabilized and then, over the following 2 weeks, began to return. He started eating again. He started talking. He asked to go outside, which Drava allowed in short intervals, and on the second of these intervals he asked to see the healer, who was treating him. Maren was at the new garden site when the message came. She came to the main hall, and she was brought to the room that was still set up as the sick room, because Ren had not yet been strong enough to return to his own room and Caelan had not been willing to move him until he was. Ren was sitting up in bed. He was pale and thinner than he should have been, and the steadying quality that he carried was currently operating at low capacity, dimmed by weeks of illness. But it was there, present in him the way a low flame is present, small but not extinguished. He looked at Maren when she came in with the direct, uncalculated attention of a child who has not yet learned to mediate his perception through social strategy. He asked her if she had been at the Borderlands gathering 7 months ago. She was still for a moment. Then she told him yes. He told her that he remembered. Not clearly. He had been very ill by the time she had found him, and he had been unconscious for most of what she had done, and he had been told afterward only that he had taken a bad turn and recovered quickly, and that everyone had been very relieved. But he said that he remembered her hands. That he had been aware, in whatever way a person is aware of things when they are at the edge of consciousness, of her working over him. That it had felt, he said again, like the garden he had dreamed about. White and very certain. She looked at this child for a long moment. This small boy who was the continuation of 17 generations of an unbroken line, who carried in his blood something that had been held and passed down across more history than most people were able to fully conceptualize, who had nearly died twice now and had been saved both times by the same set of hands. She thought about what it had cost to save him. She thought about the ash cooling at the edge of Ashveil territory. She thought about the 31 seeds she had planted 3 days ago in new soil. She told him he was going to be completely well. He asked her if she was staying. She looked at the door of the sick room, which was open, and through the open door she could see the edge of the main hall, and at the edge of the main hall she could see Caelan, who was making no effort to appear, as though he had not been listening. She told Ren that she was going to be here for at least 3 years, because she had a garden to grow, and it required her full attention. Ren said that 3 years was a very long time. She agreed that it was. He said that his father had told him the healer was very good. He said, with the gravity of a 7-year-old delivering a considered compliment, that he thought his father was right. She thanked him. Then she told him to rest and left the room. Caelan was standing in the main hall when she came out. He was not pretending to be there for any reason other than the reason he was there. He had stopped pretending with her. It was easier. It was also, he was finding, considerably more complicated than pretending had ever been, but it was honest, and she had established early that honesty was the condition for everything else. She told him that Ren's recovery was progressing correctly, and that they were still on the timeline she had described. He said he knew. He said Drava had told him this morning. She said then he already knew everything she was here to tell him. He said not everything. She looked at him. She waited. He asked her how she was. Not how the garden was. Not how the treatment was going. How she was. She considered the question with the same care she gave to everything. It was not a simple question, and she was not a person who gave simple answers to questions that were not simple. She told him she was here. She told him that being here was, at the moment, a thing she was choosing actively and daily rather than a thing that had become easy, and that she thought he should know that. He said he did know that. He said that he intended to make it easier to choose. That he did not know exactly how yet. That he was going to figure it out. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said that the moonflower seeds she had planted needed to be checked in 3 days, and that she would need access to the eastern water source for the compound preparation at the lunar phase, and she wanted to confirm that access. He said she had access to everything she needed. She said good. She left. He stood in the main hall, and he breathed out, for what felt like the first time in a very long time. The garden grew. Not quickly. That is not what these things do. They grow with the unhurried insistence of things that know exactly where they are going and do not need to be rushed about the getting there. Maren tended it in the early mornings, and in the evenings, and in the specific lunar hours, when the tending needed to happen whether the hour was convenient or not. The pack grew accustomed to seeing her light at unusual hours. Grew accustomed to her presence in a way that the 11 years at the edge of the territory had not produced, because at the edge of the territory she had been visible only to those who went looking, and here she was simply present, part of the landscape of the pack in a way that changed the landscape slightly. Children came to watch. She did not encourage this. She also, notably, did not discourage it. When they asked questions about what she was growing, she answered with accuracy and without condescension. When one of the elder children asked if she could teach her something, Maren had been quiet for a long time before she said that they could discuss what that would look like. The elder Hesker came to find Maren one morning, 6 weeks into the garden's second growth. She brought something in a cloth-wrapped package. She unwrapped it and showed Maren what was inside, and Maren went very still when she saw it. It was a small journal. Old? The kind of old that is specific and deliberate, preserved with care. The handwriting inside was not Hesker's. Hesker explained that it had belonged to a woman who had lived adjacent to Ashveil territory 80 years ago, who had been, by the documentation inside the journal, of the same line as Maren's father's family. A moon worker. One of the line. The journal contained records of her garden. Seeds she had cultivated. Compounds she had developed. And in the final section, annotated observations she had made about the moon working itself, its costs and its management, written in the careful language of someone who had spent decades understanding how to bear what she carried. Maren turned the pages with the hands of someone encountering something they did not know they needed until it was in their hands. Hesker told her that she had been holding the journal for 30 years, since she had found it in a record collection she had obtained from a neighboring pack, waiting for the person it was for. Maren asked how she had known she was the person it was for. Hesker said that she had watched her walk through the ash of her burning garden to save the seeds before walking away. She said that a person who does that is a person who knows something essential about what it means to carry something forward, and that the journal belonged with someone who understood that. Maren closed the journal and held it. She said thank you in a voice that was not quite entirely steady, which the elder registered and honored by looking away briefly at something across the clearing. By the 3rd month, the silver herbs were showing their first true growth above the soil. By the 5th month, the moonflower seedlings, fragile and demanding and requiring the specific care that Maren gave them in the dedicated pre-dawn hours, had reached the stage where Maren allowed herself, privately, to believe they were going to survive. Ren had returned to full strength by the 2nd month, his recovery completing with the clean resolution that correct treatment produces, the moon sickness lifting from his system the way weather lifts, completely, leaving no residue. He came to the garden often. He had asked his father and his father had asked Maren and Maren had said that if Ren himself wanted to come, he was old enough to ask her directly. Ren had come directly. She had told him the same things she was beginning to tell the elder girl who was learning, the names and properties of what was growing, what each plant needed, why the timing of tending mattered. He listened with the attentiveness of a child who has been close enough to the edge to understand, in a way most 7-year-olds do not, that the things that seem quiet and slow are sometimes the things that matter most. Caelan came less often, but he came consistently. He did not pretend that he was coming for practical reasons. He came the way a person comes to something they have decided they want to be near, with the honesty that had become the only mode available to him in her presence. He helped when she indicated that help was useful. He stepped back when she indicated that it was not. He was learning, slowly and with the humility of a man who is not accustomed to being in a situation where his authority is not the primary organizing principle, how to be present without being in charge. She was learning, slowly and with the caution of a person for whom trust is not a resource that replenishes easily, that being in charge of her own space did not require the space to be empty of other people. That the garden growing in the center of Pack territory, tended by her hands, but observed by many eyes, visited by children and elders and a 7-year-old heir, and his father who came consistently, and without pretense, was not less hers for being known. Was, perhaps, more fully itself for the same reason the elder had identified all those years ago. That it felt like being known. On the evening of the garden's first full year, when the silver herbs had reached the height of their second-year growth, and the moonflower seedlings were into their first real establishment, and the compound root plants had spread into the third quadrant the way they were meant to, Maren built a small fire at the garden's center. Not to burn anything. To mark something. In the tradition of her father's line, the first fire of a new garden at the end of its first year, a small ceremony that required no audience and no performance, only the practitioner and the flame and the acknowledgement that something living had survived its first difficult year, and was still here. She had not told anyone she was doing it. Caelan arrived anyway. He came in from the eastern path at the hour that the fire was at its steadiest, and he stopped at the gate and he looked at her and looked at the fire and did not come in without being invited. She looked at him from across the garden. Then she stepped back slightly to make room on the side of the fire she was not occupying. He came through the gate and he stood beside her, and they watched the fire together, and neither of them said anything for a long time, because there are moments in the construction of something new between people when words are the less accurate language, and the more honest thing to do is simply to be present and let the present speak. The moonflowers were not yet open. They had 2 more years before they would be ready. But the seedlings were alive in the dark soil of the garden's fourth quadrant, doing the slow and essential work of becoming what they were going to be, in the way that things become what they are going to be, quietly and without announcement, through the sustained daily choice of growing toward the light. The garden breathed. The fire held. And at the edge of Ashveil territory's center, a pack gathered itself around 2 people, who had shown each other the worst and the best of what they were, and were standing in the middle of it, in the dark, choosing to remain. If this story reached something in you, if you found yourself inside any part of it, if you recognized the person who saves seeds in the middle of a fire, or the person who has to learn what they destroyed before they understand what they had, share this with someone who needs it. Leave a comment telling us which moment held you. Tell us where you found yourself in it. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because this is a space built for exactly these stories, the ones about what breaks and what holds and what quietly, stubbornly, insists on growing anyway. We will keep telling them. Stay with us.